Hello. Hi, and welcome, everybody. We are about 1 minute late as we were allowing some latecomers to join the chat, but we'll be kicking off very, very, very soon. Just to start with, thanking you all for joining us today. We're really excited to have a really, hopefully fun and interactive and effective discussion around reward and compensation. I would guess that for those of you that are here, you're likely already feeling the weight and the pressure of major comp challenges right now. I think all reward leaders are feeling and facing the same struggles, really tight budget constraints that feel even tighter than ever before. We're facing employee demands to stay competitive. And, we always have constant pressure from leadership to, keep the top talents that we have, but you can't have endless resources. So it's really hard to sort of balance all of that, I think. And they're very real pain points and are likely to become even more painful as we head into 2025. So we want to use this hour or so to focus on the issues that keep coming up. We'll start with the latest comp trends using fresh data from Ravio's new report to see where the market is really heading. We'll also dive into budgeting and exploring how companies should or are balancing their financial limits with the need for pay practices that are also motivating to employees. And finally, we'll tackle the sort of classic dilemma that we often find in front of us, which is market adjustments versus merit-based increases or a combination of both. So all of these areas hopefully touch a key challenge that we're all facing, and hopefully you'll walk away from this webinar in an hour or so with the insights and some practical advice you can apply right now. We'll also be available for Q&A at the end, and by all means, let's stay in touch after this as well. Now, before we dive in, just a tiny bit of housekeeping. If you could keep yourself on mute, that would be really helpful. Sometimes the background noise can be distracting. We also want to keep the webinar as interactive as possible. So if you do have any questions, do jump in at any time. You can either pop them in the chat or use the raise hands functionality. And we'll also have a few quick polls during the session to get a pulse on everyone's thoughts. So do keep an eye out for those. We'd love to see everyone's input. We also have a really diverse audience signing in today. We have participants from the US, the UK, Germany, Estonia, Lithuania, Switzerland, Austria, and many more. So hopefully through the polls, we'll also be able to see inputs from different countries. And we do also have an equity slide at the end that slices the data per country. So do stay tuned for that. Aiming to keep the content for around 45 minutes. So do stay, and hope you find a lot of this helpful. Now, really happy to be introducing our wonderful guest for today. Welcome, Olga Flegontova, who is the Senior Total Rewards Partner at Zalando. So Olga brings really deep experience in comp strategy, and together we'll be hosting you in this discussion today and sharing some of the best practices. Olga, I don't know if you wanted to just say hi and give a wave.
Giving a wave. Thank you for having me, Vaso, and I'm looking forward for our discussion.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. I think it'll be fun. A quick note on where the Ravio data comes from. For those of you unfamiliar, Ravio is a data company aiming to make compensation work for literally everyone. Ravio's data comes from over 1,000 tech companies across Europe and is powered by more than 300,000 data points. That means we can build a platform that is really helping companies like yours stay competitive and informed on macro trends. So with that, let's look at the data. So all the insights that I'm about to share come from our 2025 compensation trends report, which you're welcome to download. I'm sure we can find a way to share it afterwards. First up is hiring. So we're seeing a notable drop in hiring rates. We're actually down 15% year over year. Now, this has been felt much more strongly by growth stage companies, but late stage companies are also holding the line, and hiring there is just 22%. Now, given the worldwide uncertainty, businesses are taking a lot more of a cautious approach when thinking about expanding headcount, especially in tech companies, and it's overall setting a different pace, I think, for the coming year. Now, if we look at this in partnership with salary increase trends, so we've had many years of very aggressively climbing pay scales. This year, we're actually seeing a bit of a cooling off, with salary increases down about 14% from last year. Now, this reflects a more conservative stance on budgets, likely driven by economic uncertainty, economic caution, also by lower inflation rates across the whole of Europe. Now, most companies do still expect to give raises, and we'll look at it in more detail later, but a third are now anticipating increases in the 3 to 4% range, which is well below the very high salary growth rates that we've been seeing from a couple of years back. And finally, we're going to look at attrition. This is the salary increases for next year. And finally, looking at attrition, this is a standout point. So here we've seen a massive decline, which is down by 33% year on year. The shift tells us that employees are choosing stability, and companies also are focusing heavily on retention. Remember, folks aren't hiring as much as they were previously. But 65% of companies are still planning headcount growth in 2025. So the competition for the very top talent remains very high. And that means that thoughtful retention strategies, of which salaries and benefits more general are an important lever, those are now more important than ever. I also want to specifically call out within this slide engineering, where we can see a really significant drop of 29% in attrition rates. I mean, that's wild and unlike anything we've seen, I would say, in the past 10 years, to be honest. Olga, I know I've just sort of shown a lot, but from your perspectives, how are these shifts affecting reward strategies and workforce planning in companies? And are there specific areas that companies are focusing on more this year as a result of what we've just shown?
Those trends indeed confirm my observations as well, and the same data is coming from different reports, and many companies are experiencing hiring freezes, and of course there is a trend for the layoffs, and it is a significant shift from the market environment of a couple of years ago, especially for tech companies. And we are now in so-called tech winter. Regarding salary increases, the trend of last couple or 3 years remains stable. The companies are still offering increases, but planning budgets is more conservative. What is actually growing is employee expectations. Employers are seeking for more support during these turbulent times of high inflation. Attrition rates are down, as we saw on the slides, and this gives companies a chance to catch their breath, actually, in the constant race for the top talent and evaluate efficiency of the rewards programs. But this doesn't mean that job market is dead, and it is becoming more challenging for the candidates.
So thanks for that, Olga. So just to be clear, it's becoming more challenging for candidates because the supply of new roles to market is down. Therefore, for basically it's an employer's market. Is that what you meant?
Yes, I think the recruitment pipelines now are fuller. And candidates are actually facing tougher competition, and companies can afford being a bit more picky and aim for very, very best talent, setting also a higher bar for new hires. And also, if you talk about expectations of employees, they now expect not only competitive salaries, but we are talking about total rewards, total compensation, and comprehensive benefits. Also, career development opportunities, commitment to well-being, and demand on holistic benefits programs is higher than it was before the pandemic. That's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly a lot when you think about, what levers we can pull. So you mentioned, competitive salaries, benefits, career development, commitment to well-being. That's it's a lot of things to bear in mind, which can be, a blessing and a curse. A blessing because it means we have some options to use. A curse because it's a lot and our jobs are already pretty complicated enough. Are there any, so of those that you mentioned, are there any particular benefits that are, standing out as particularly valuable at this point in time, whether, that you've seen personally or through your network or sort of heard in the market?
I see that demand on benefits that support financial well-being is rising, and employers are looking for the benefits that help them to manage finances more effectively and to plan and build a stable financial future. It is rather uncommon for Europe, I would say, but it can be also financial educational programs, or even if we are in Germany, it can be help to submit a tax declaration. And of course, general well-being and mental health support also remains being important.
That's really interesting. And look, great to hear. I think financial education is, a really important for everyone, all walks of life. We can all be upskilled in that. And I can definitely see how important it is for an employer, if they can, to be able to offer that sort of education and upskilling for their employees. And certainly, here in the UK, but also across Europe, I think we're really seeing people are being squeezed with an increased cost of life cost, which is difficult on the day-to-day level. So. I wonder whether there's also some added benefit of offering something like educational support because it's so, it's so long term. Great. Thanks for that. We're now going to look into 2025 budget planning. One of the big challenges raised by every single rewards team. So questions like, how do we keep our comp competitive? How do we attract the right talent while also stretching every pound to make it work for the team and the bottom line? It's it's always a very delicate balance with lots of stakeholders, employees, leadership, finance, etc. So let's explore a few approaches that can help us set realistic budgets while staying aligned with companies' goals. So I think we have a poll now. Let's see if I succeed. Here it is! Yay! So would love your feedback on a quick pulse check. What percentage about of your payroll are you planning to allocate to salary increases next year? If you, as in this coming year. If you don't know for this coming year, then by all means, if you can share whatever you did this year, that would be helpful. Let's see. Now, I'm not sure where the results come in. Oh, there it is. Okay, great. Okay, interesting. So we see more than, and it's growing, more than half of the population aiming for between 2 and 4%. So that's really interesting because you can see that according to the Ravio survey data on overall salary budgets, actually was a lot more aspirational with north of 4 to 5%, north of 26% within 4 to 5, 5 to 6, 17%, and north of 6%, 18%. So what does this tell us? This tells us that actually, it may be the case that when sort of aspirationally planning, folks sort of say, oh, good, we'll definitely get 6% this year. But actually, when push comes to shove, inevitably our budgets get cut. I think that's what we're seeing here. Cool. So. I mean, when it comes to setting budgets, inevitably we see sort of one of two main strategies, either a very finance-led approach or an HR-led approach. Obviously it's a bit of a combination because these two teams have to work together, but, typically it's either, the main leader is one of the two, either finance or HR. So each of us has a unique way of managing the resources, managing the process, and managing the stakeholders, but they all come with it. Each process comes with its own advantages and challenges. So typically I would say that finance-led budgeting tends to be a little bit stricter, maybe with comp adjustments sort of very tightly aligned to financial forecasts and the sort of big picture goals. That's really good because, we have a high level of accuracy, less likely to change, pardon me, and also means that we can work in partnership with HR. The cons are that sometimes this can mean, especially in the face of a super strong finance team, it can mean that HR takes a little bit more of a backward role, or at least a role in the sidelines. Whereas, this is something that touches 100% of our employee population's lives. So that can be a little bit, a little bit painful as someone who has gone through that process many times. On the other hand, amongst HR-led budgeting, we often see, and certainly I can say this for myself, I'll adopt a much more adaptable approach, which means many changes. There's an overall focus on retention and engagement, which may allow for custom adjustments based on specific talent needs for the organization at that time. The pros are that HR owns the end-to-end control, and we have that wonderful seat at the table with a strategic and business mindset. The cons are that, and certainly I've been a victim of this. The cons that I've found is that usually at a much later stage, I start having a lot more involvement from important stakeholders, and the project sort of gets derailed a little bit amongst feedback around, oh, wait, when did this get signed off? How did it get signed off? We should change it. there's a little bit more interference there, I have found. Olga, what have you seen as the biggest benefits and downsides of each approach, and how should companies sort of find the right balance between the two?
From my experience, both finance-led and HR-led approaches, they both bring valuable but different strengths into the process. And companies can benefit actually by balancing them effectively. Finance-led budgeting keeps budgets steady, and having budgets aligned with financial forecasts is great for stability. But can sometimes be quite rigid, and companies can miss a mark of immediate talent needs in a fast-paced market. HR-led budgeting helps address specific talent's need in real time. So we are much more flexible, but the challenge is, of course, keeping it aligned with the broader financial goals and to avoid overspending. And striking this balance usually means combining and blending both approaches. As an example, it can be setting a financial sound baseline and allowing HR also some freedom to make targeted adjustments. And good cooperation between HR and finance is essential for this approach and for success in this case.
Oh, like most things in life, yes, collaboration and teamwork, partnership is what leads you to a successful outcome. What advice would you give me, but also our listeners, regarding building a good relationship and a strong connection with your finance counterparts, before a comp review project, in order to ensure a good result? It's certainly something that I've struggled with at times.
I think we are all in the same boat. And I would start with regular open communication and involving finance early in planning, so they understand the why behind the HR needs, especially when it comes about talent and retention. Good approach is also to share data that allows to connect the dots and see correlation between compensation and engagement. Another important point is also to make sure that you understand finance basics, that you are able to speak the same language. The better HR and finance understand each other's goals and limitations, the smoother the collaboration and the better are the results.
Yeah. Thank you. That's really helpful. I think one thing that we can also borrow from our engineering friends, and something that has helped me, working in sort of an agile way. So even having sort of a daily, 5-minute check-in when you're in the comp review sort of madness. 5-minute check-in, start of the day. Okay, where's everyone at? Is everyone coping? Are we all? Do we all know what we're doing, when we're meant to be doing it by? Even if it's just a bit of almost like a bit of a therapy circle and a project management sort of tool, I found that to be helpful. Just a tiny tactic that that has helped me in the past. Cool. And then thinking about transparency, it's a difficult subject because most companies do want to be transparent, I think, with their employees, and it's certainly something that folks are asking more and more from their employers. But it can be tricky, when budgets are tight and the overall macro condition is difficult. But I think communicating clear and honest information to managers and employees around budget limitations, is necessary. And, people are adults, but it can also feel like you're walking, a tightrope, and you're not, am I saying the right thing? It can be quite anxiety inducing, I think. Olga, how have you seen reward teams make or try to make the budgeting process transparent and and digestible, particularly for managers who are tasked with sharing sometimes quite difficult, thorny decisions with their teams? Are there any strategies that you've either deployed or that you've seen that have helped ease those conversations while trying to keep the trust and morale high? I know it's a difficult balance.
Great question. I think transparency in budgets is challenging, but it's essential for the trust. And I've seen reward teams succeed by breaking down complex budget details into simple, relatable terms for managers. And tools like FAQ, summaries, even training session can help managers to feel more confident in explaining the budget decisions. And our responsibility as compensation professionals is actually to equip managers with a toolkit that will help them in different budget scenarios. We all have leaders of a different experience and a skill set, and it's important to keep it in mind. One of the effective approaches is, again, focusing on the why behind the budget choices and connecting them to the goals and to the company goals and stability. And this helps managers to communicate value behind each decision, which keeps they and employees' trust high.
Yeah, totally hear you. Thanks, Olga. I mean, definitely the why. It's always important, but especially behind communicating, things that are so mission critical, people's pay. I also think, you mentioned, training and, using simple, relatable terms. I think that can also be really powerful. And even something as simple as a glossary I found to work really well. So, guess what? Employees don't all know what a compa ratio is and, a salary bandwidth. And, even a simple glossary with definitions of simple terms that we use on the day-to-day can be really helpful to both enabling managers to best have those conversations, but also for employees to look at the information provided to them, digest it. By all means, go to their managers with any questions, but it just gives them something to reflect on while learning more about comp. The other way, I guess, just anecdotally, a bit of a story. One way that I always know that I have failed in enabling managers to do a good job of explaining comp decisions to their direct reports is when I get a message from a panicked manager saying, "Hey, so and so is upset. Can you speak to them directly, please?" What does that tell me? That tells me that I did not give that manager the right tools, and I didn't practice enough with them to make sure that they were able to succeed during this difficult conversation. So, look, we can't get everything right, but I think it's important to, when you have these little signals, reflect on what we could have done better as people leaders and people teams to sort of stop the negative signal. You also spoke quickly, Olga, about transparency and showing the numbers of a budget using the same language as the finance team. Now, this won't be appropriate for every company, but I personally find that it can be really enlightening and empowering to really, show the numbers to employees. So, show high-level revenue, OPEX, CAPEX, break down what the available budget is and why. That's really helpful because, as an employee, I would love to have that kind of visibility into a business, and I can make my own decision if it's too scary for me, or if I think, yeah, this is cool. I think people make their own decisions. It won't be appropriate for everyone, but I think giving folks information they need to decide whether they align with the comp philosophy or not, and with the mission of the business, for example, can be very powerful. Cool. Let's dive next into a question that I know is close to everybody's heart. Now, should reward be driven by individual performance? Should it be driven by the market, or should it be driven by a combination of both? This is always evolving, but let's kick off with a quick poll on this. So let's see. Yeah, I would love your input. Should salaries in the organization be tied more to performance, market benchmarks, or a mixture of both? Please choose the option that best fits your current approach, or alternatively what you'd like to see. Let's see, these polls scare me. Technology scares me. Okay, great. So we're seeing a huge preference for a combination. Now, this is super interesting to me because we can see that the Ravio comp trend report, which we released a couple of months ago, showed that around 41% of companies adjust mainly for performance, against 38% that have the combined approach. So it's interesting that our group here, albeit small relatively, is so overwhelmingly 92% going for a combination. Cool. So if we just sort of deep dive a little bit into markets versus performance versus blended. Market-based adjustments always ensure that salaries are aligned with industry standards. And the downside is that it can sometimes overlook individual achievements, and it might very well leave your top performers feeling somewhat underappreciated, and or that their progression, and certainly their monetary progression in the company, is capped. Market-based adjustments only were all the rage a few years ago, I'd say maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and when a whole host of organizations sort of decoupled performance from pay. I actually think we're slowly seeing a rebalancing on the other side with much stronger performance-based adjustments. So merit adjustments allow us to directly reward individual contributors, fostering that culture of real achievement. We reward folks who really go above and beyond, but there is a challenge here. Scaling this is really difficult. You get inequities or what appear to be inequities across the organization. You might not always keep pace with market shifts, especially where there's very competitive fields. It also, somewhat worryingly, may incentivize the wrong, or at least more short-term individualistic behaviors, i.e. solving for the right now and what works for me and my targets versus what is best for the overall company. Which is why lots of folks prefer, and as we're seeing amongst our cohort group, prefer the blended approach. So both market and performance adjustments and balancing that out. That means we're able to reward individual contributors while staying in line with the broader market trends. Hopefully you combine stability and recognition. Olga, how do you see market-based adjustments supporting competitiveness, and where might they fall short compared to performance-based adjustments?
Thanks, Vaso. I think that the effectiveness of market-based versus performance-based adjustments often also depends on the economic environment and location-specific practices and the company's development stage. For example, growth stage companies competing for the talent, and they may prioritize market adjustment, and stable organizations might keep time fine-tuning their processes to balance both approaches. So market-based adjustments require precise benchmarking, moving beyond anecdotal feedback to a structured understanding of the market. And this usually involves some investing in the right tools and skilled professionals who understand benchmarking as an activity. While this approach keeps salaries competitive, it may risk overlooking top performers, which could obviously impact their retention. And performance-based adjustments need a strong objective methodology supported by a robust infrastructure to evaluate contributions fairly. In my experience, the ideal balance is a blended approach, as always, using market data to factor in salary bands adjustments, including also some internal metrics like attrition, new hire statistics, band usage, and combine it with the performance-based evaluations for the merit adjustments. And this combination rewards individual achievements while still staying agile and competitive in the market.
Yeah, agreed. I think it's also important to say that, there's no right or wrong way. It needs to work for the company and and the employees. But we are sort of seeing, I think, a bit more of a shift towards the blended approach than we had previously. And of course, as we mentioned earlier, there's many more levers to pull as well. There's benefits, which we touched on. But there's also equity. And equity is a funny one because, a great exit could end up completely dwarfing any salary increase. Or conversely, it could end up being 0 pennies, or somewhere in between. So it's really difficult to sort of imagine, but it's a really important one to bear into account as a lever. With that in mind, equity as a performance incentive. What do you think, Olga? Here you can see on the right-hand side, you can see what the Ravio survey found. That a pretty big majority, are happy with their current equity incentives program, but also a sizable 24% that don't offer equity and don't plan to offer equity either. What's your view on using equity as a reward for performance? Is it an effective motivator? How are you seeing Europe respond to equity versus, for example, the US?
I observed the same trend of more and more companies adopting US approach and shifting from equity for founders and C-suite to equity for everyone. In US, equity has long been an inseparable part of a total compensation, and European countries are only stepping into the same stage. Equity itself is a powerful tool, and it gives employees a real stake in the company, which drives commitment, engagement, especially for those who are focused on the growth. It's not only a sense of ownership, but also an opportunity to participate in the success of organization, which fosters also long-term engagement. But to be effective, equity programs require a lot of enablements for leads and employees to give them full understanding what is it in equity for them. And especially in the challenging tax landscape of Germany, for example, equity sometimes sounds very complicated. Companies also have different opportunities to choose and decide if they want to go with a more default option of standard vesting schedule or to tie it to performance milestones. And it's important to ensure that equity awards align with the market standards and company development stage, meaning if everyone in your industry is doing equity, you should definitely do it too. And approach to equity in a public company and in early stage startup could be very different. You mentioned 0 as an incentive for employees after the exit. I experienced it as well, and it can be quite disappointing.
Absolutely.
From my experience, equity as a part of total compensation is much more common for tech companies, and still quite a rare animal for other industries.
Yeah, totally. I'll also share this slide, which has the slice according to geographical location, which I think is really interesting, and also changing over time. I guess one thing that I sort of have front of mind is that I believe that equity incentives will start getting a lot more use and a lot more prized in Europe, despite an overall more risk-averse employee population than in the US. We've had a few really big exits from which employees, especially the very early ones, will have done really, really well from. The likes of, in the UK, Wise, Deliveroo, even Darktrace. Most recently, we've had represented in the news really big secondary share sales from the likes of Revolut and Monzo. So these big success stories are such a great indicator that sometimes, not always, but sometimes those equity grants can earn you a really big result. And that too can help create a bit of a flywheel effect, because you have those early employees who have now come into a big prize. They typically will have joined the company early days, so they typically have that entrepreneurial thing inside of them. So suddenly they've got the entrepreneurial drive, they've got some money, they've got the know-how. They will go on to become the next generation of founders starting businesses. So we get this really nice flywheel effect from folks who have done well from the equity. We've also in Europe seen some great literature and thought leadership from the likes of Index, who have done amazing research on everything to do with share options. And that's, I use those tools all the time. I know we're building something internally that's really cool. So all in all, I think leaders, people, employees, we are seeing an upskilling on the subject. And I think we'll see a movement towards, more value or more perceived value from an employee part. That's my thesis. I have no evidence to suggest that, but that's what I think. Cool. I think, and we're doing pretty good for time. So we're up. We're at the Q&A section. I know we had a few Q&As. Sorry I didn't respond to them in real time. I didn't see them, so I'm sorry about that. But let's deal with Jennifer's question first, and by all means keep them coming in. So Jennifer's question, thanks for the question. Out of curiosity, when thinking about the collaboration with finance, does your finance team have the same visibility to individual salaries, for example, for more exact budget planning? Certainly in all the organizations that I've worked, Jennifer, my finance teams always had, full visibility on every single aspect of anyone's salary, including oftentimes the equity allocations as well. Olga, I don't know whether you've had a different experience.
I think it also depends on the stage of a company. Sometimes with developed companies, it's just not always possible to break it down till the individual salary, and finance is planning on much higher level. So in small companies, I definitely saw the same trend. So finance usually has opportunity to access individual salaries, but it's important to understand they are planning not on individual level anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, there will always be someone in the finance team that does have access to all the raw data. It might not be, it won't be everybody in the finance team, but there will be, the payroll person. There is someone, the FP&A person, that has access to everything. Cool. Next, we have Gina's question from earlier on. So thanks, Gina, for the question. So it's two questions. One, how common is it for companies to apply a merit matrix by default in a merit cycle versus using it as a recommendation tool, or not at all? Olga, I think you'll have more, more experience in this particular question, but happy to chime in as well.
Yeah, I think it's rather uncommon to have it as a recommendation, but there are different approaches that allow some flexibility within the merit matrix. And when it's just recommended increase and companies can get rogue, it's rather uncommon.
Yeah. Thanks, Olga. I would add that, so I've only ever worked at, small companies that then grew, but stayed pretty small. I've never worked at a big, multinational corporation. So in my experience in tech, if you've got a compensation philosophy, you're doing really well. Happy days, well done. Give yourself a pat on the back. If you've got a merit matrix, wow, like you have thought about your comp philosophy and like taken steps to make it a reality. I would recommend for a merit cycle, if you don't want to commit to something precise yet, you can by all means use a range within the merit matrix that gives you some flexibility and is still able to be socialized. And secondly, you can also, by all means, put the recommendation towards the managers of, here's what the merit matrix spits out for your direct reports, and the process for you to challenge or discuss further is the following, and have a process and follow the process, because it's really important that we get buy-in from folks that we are running a fair process and that they have some say in the matter. Doing it just top down can be painful and risks the HR told me to say that. So I think if you have a process whereby you're able to challenge the merit matrix, that can be helpful. So the follow-up question was, what percentage increases are typically used as benchmarks in merit matrices by companies that factor in both employee performance and comp ratio? Olga, I don't know. It's quite a precise question. I don't know if you have anything helpful to add.
To be honest, in my experience, it varies a lot, and it varies from year to year because it's usually economical situation also has an impact on the budget availability, and companies can change these percentages. And usually merit matrix with the ratios between the buckets stays more or less stable and the same. But year to year, the percentages of increases really vary.
Yeah, so completely agree. I'm sure we do have some literature somewhere around sort of recommended merit increases. Happy to share afterwards, but it will vary according to company, according to budget, according to year, according to performance. So there's huge variability there. But I'll try and share something later, Gina. Okay, then I think we have Suni's question, which was, is there any information available as of what maturity stage equity for all turns into equity for select roles? Olga?
I wouldn't say that it's like direct journey from equity to all to equity for selected roles. And more of it, I can tell you that I observed in one of the companies, it's actually opposite way around. So it was first equity for the executives. Then there was a wish to engage everyone. And it really depends on the company and how the company structures equity approach, because it's also at some point depends on the headcount and dilution of equity. So it's hard to predict.
It is hard to predict. But so I basically second everything that Olga said. Suni, I would say that I think the interesting question here is that, is it worth giving equity to everyone if the equity allocation will be, the equivalent of, I don't know, like $100 vesting over 4 years, pre-tax. I totally get the cultural nuances, that it sounds good and it's a great message to say that everyone is a share option holder in this company. But equally, I don't want to be the one delivering the message that the equity allocation is $100 pre-tax over 4 years. So I think, it's a delicate balance, but probably for me, as we get to the stage where equity allocations would be that small, certainly for a huge majority of the roles, frankly, I would rather give people the cash.
I think also it helps when you track the usage, so to say. So how many people are exercising actually, because it's also, equity comes, unfortunately, with some administrative efforts in HR side. And again, you need to find a balance. Sometimes the efforts and paperwork that you should invest to support this €100 equity grant, sometimes it just doesn't worth it.
Agreed. Okay, Lynn's question next. Should equity amount or distribution take part-time or full-time factors into consideration? I understand this question to be that should you prorata equity allocations for part-time workers, and my answer is yes, and that's what we tend to do. There are some share option plan rules that say one cannot be a share option holder and work less than X hours. So you'd have to just make sure that they fulfill that criteria. But typically, I think prorating is appropriate. Olga?
Yeah, I totally support it, and I see that there is also a question about common practices when it comes to the equity allocation to employees in maternity and parental leave. In my experience, allocation stays the same, but there are some nuances in the vesting schedule. So the time spent in parental leave or maternity leave can be not sometimes excluded from the vesting.
Great. And also, just to finish this subject off, we have one more question on equity. What are common practices when it comes to equity allocation to employees during parental leave? Happy to jump in on this one. And I think there will be market differences. But look, I think if you are on parental leave, the same way that you receive like parental pay for, at least some of that time, then I believe that share options should continue vesting. They were part of your reward package. So, while you are also receiving at least some parental leave, it should continue vesting, in my opinion. Certainly, at Ravio, we've had a couple of parents now go off on parental leave, and we have kept their share options package vesting. Olga?
I think it really depends again. So if the companies have really solid equity program with all the defined conditions, you can obviously consider their maternity and parental leaves.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So I'm just going to answer one question really quickly, and then there's one more question that I think we don't have time for, but I will answer async. So should annual grants of equity take into consideration performance factor? We touched on this a little bit earlier, but didn't go into detail. So I think by all means, it's a really good lever to pull, especially if your budgets are tight. So it's much more palatable to tell your top performer, hey, we don't have that much money for a salary increase, it's staying the same, for example, but here's a really compelling new grant option that could potentially be life-changing because we so value you. If you have that opportunity in the cap table, and there is, you're able to do that, I have found that to be incredibly effective. So I'm a big fan of taking performance evaluations. I'm a big fan of thinking about performance in regards to how you give equity top-ups.
I think it also, in such situation, you will need to make sure that you have performance management system. So you have defined OKRs or KPIs, so you can consider this performance factor objectively. So it's not just coming out of the blue by the decision of manager.
Yes. Super. We also had another question around which financial health and well-being benefits are very popular at the moment. I will actually look into the Ravio data and send an async reply to that question. I might even post it on LinkedIn, but there's a lot of cool stuff out there. So yeah, sorry we didn't have the chance to finish on that question. But finally, just a small invitation to a future event. If you are in London or able to travel to London, we are having a reward leader drinks on the 19th of November in Central. It's really informal. It's a really nice chance to get together as a small group and connect with fellow comp leaders. Ravio's customer success person, Florence Morton, she's amazing, and Jeffrey, our Netherlands lead, will also be there. I'll be there too, and there might be some more familiar names. We'll send out a sign-up form along with a recording of today's session, and we'll also answer the async questions with any Ravio data that I'm able to find that will be helpful. Other than that, Olga, thank you so much for your expertise. I'll be following up with a ton of questions to you because I need your help. But it's been great. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you for having me.
All right, folks, I think that's all we had today. Wishing you all the best, and we'll follow up soon. Goodbye.
Bye.